Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to this Migration Policy Institute webinar titled DACA at 4, Estimating the Potentially Eligible Population and Assessing Application and Renewal Trends. We're very pleased to be able to sponsor this webinar on roughly or close to the 4th anniversary when the DACA program opened for business. I'm Margie McHugh, Director of MPI's National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy, and I'll be moderating the webinar. The webinar will largely focus on the release of a report that went up on our website this morning titled DACA at 4, Participation in the Deferred Action Program and Impacts on Recipients. And today we'll hear from two of the report's authors, Randy Capps, Director of Research for U.S. Programs at MPI, and Faye Hitzman, who is a Policy Analyst and Program Coordinator for MPI's U.S. Immigration Program. Before going any further, let me just run through a few important details. First, shortly after the webinar, you'll be able to find slides and audio from the webinar on our website, migrationpolicy.org, and you can go to the events section to find that. If you're looking for the report, you can see the link there on your screen, but you can also find it. It's featured in the rotator on the home page of the website today, so it'll be very easy to find. And then I know that a lot of you who are on the phone follow MPI's data tools and demographic work, and so you'll be pleased to know that today, with the release of today's report, we've also got an updated set of data tools on the website having to do with the DACA population. You can see the link there on your screen. If you have any problems accessing the webinar, you see there the events@migrationpolicy.org email that you can write to, or simply call that number on the screen. We're monitoring it constantly, and we've got folks who are ready to help you resolve any problems. Throughout the webinar, it would be great if you could use the Q&A chat function on your screen. It's always helpful to us to get questions in advance so we can try and figure out how to sequence them and combine some of them, that sort of thing. So please feel free to use that right from the start. And then you see there that you can also tweet your questions to the address that you see there. So just in terms of getting going, I'll just say that those of you who follow our work are aware that we sort of have a three-legged stool here of different types of analyses related to the DACA program. We've been monitoring and writing about the program for almost 4 years now, probably more than 4 years even, and a big part of that work is population profiles. That's what I was just mentioning, the new updated tool that we have on the website that looks at characteristics of potentially eligible applicants. And many of you are always in touch with us about how low down in geography we can go with those and the like. We're always happy to receive those kinds of questions. Second piece of the stool is evidenced by this report that we're publishing today. We have been trying to publish these types of reports on the anniversary of the program pretty regularly, tracking what's happening with initial and renewal applications, how the adjudication processes are going, and other associated issues. And then you also know, particularly from the National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy's point of view, we've had a very strong interest in educational success issues for DACA-eligible individuals, trying to make sure that key subgroups of individuals who are potentially eligible are finding their way into the program, and also that they experience further educational success so that the program really results in them having more access to education, training, and career opportunities. In terms of today's call, what we expect to cover is, whoops, if I could only get the slide to advance. There we go. So we're going to quickly run through the key highlights from the report. Of course, the analysis of the DACA population, the updated estimates that are out as of today, some information about application and renewal rates, Also importantly, application and renewal rates by state and country of birth, which we know there's a big audience for out there across the country. We'll also talk about recent DACA policy developments and then finish with DACA's impact on recipients. Well, what's known, what we know about those so far. So again, throughout the webinar, we welcome you to send in your questions to events@migrationpolicy.org. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Randy Capps, who's the Director of Research for U.S. Programs here at MPI. He's one of the 3 co-authors of the report, and many of you know him as the head chef for many demographic analyses that come out of MPI's U.S. immigration program, and that it's very well known for, and that is certainly the case with this report. So, Randy, over to you.
Well, thanks, Margie, and we'll see what we can cook up this morning. I also have to acknowledge the other chefs on this, our collaborators from Temple University, Jim Bachmeyer and Colin Hammer, as well as Jennifer Van Hook at Penn State University. They're really the ones who helped us develop the underlying data on the unauthorized population. Also, if you will, sous chefs here at MPI who really put together the analysis of the initial and renewal application rates. That's Ariel Ruiz and Barbara Gomez-Aguinaga. So as you all know, of course, here's an overview of the DACA program eligibility rules, which are important for how we develop our estimates and application rates. The program provides work authorization and relief from deportation for 2-year periods. So to qualify, youth have to be at least age 15. They had to be under age 31 in June 2012 when the program was announced, but now we're 4 years later, so they have to be basically under age 35. They have to have arrived in the U.S. before age 16. They had to be present in June 2012, and then also have had 5 years of continuous residence since 2007. And these first 5 characteristics are fairly straightforward to model in the data that we look at, but there's a couple of other characteristics that are a little trickier. So as you're all aware, the educational requirements are a bit more complex. To qualify, youth have to have a high school diploma or equivalent, or be enrolled in school, both of which are available in the data, or be enrolled in an adult education program, which we can't measure in the data that we have. And then finally, they have to pass a security and criminal background check, and we don't have any data on that at all. So in short, what our method, as we have done in the past, we rely on the American Community Survey. The 2014 is the latest available. And with our colleague demographers, we link it back to the Survey of Income and Program Participation. And it's that latter survey, the SIP, that has the information on legal status. We look at people who don't have a legal status in the SIP and find people with similar characteristics in the ACS, and that's our basic unauthorized population. Another thing that we've done a little bit differently this time around is we've aged forward the population that's eligible. Our data are for 2014, but we want to see what the population looks like as of 2016 because we're comparing it with 2016 application numbers, and we want to, use the same time period. So the unauthorized youth who were ages 13 or 14 in the 2014 ACS are 2 years older in 2016, so they're 15 and 16 and they're eligible for the program. And so we age this group into the eligible population, as you'll see in a minute. So once again, we couldn't model criminal convictions or adult education program enrollment in the data that we employed. So here are the 3 potentially eligible populations. It's 1.9 million in total that are potentially eligible now and in the future. This number over time goes down a little bit. The entries to that population are fixed because they have to have been here by 2007, but some people do leave the country. Some people are deported and some people leave voluntarily. So there's a little shrinking of that population over time. 1.3 million are immediately eligible. This is our term for the people that meet all the criteria, including high school diploma or a current school enrollment. That group has been growing somewhat as people age into it. Then there's the youth who do not appear to meet the education criteria, and this group are the group that could qualify by having an adult education program enrollment. We just don't know if they do or don't because that's not recorded in the data. But they don't have the high school diploma and they don't have the current school enrollment. That group of 400,000 or so has been pretty consistent over time in our estimates. And then the children who are eligible in the future, that group, of course, is shrinking because every year a new cohort turns age 15. And in fact, we estimate about 250,000 have done so. They've aged in since the program was started in 2012, and there are about 230,000 left to age in through 2022, which is when the last group will age in. So now how do we calculate the application rates? Well, first, looking at the initial application rates, we look at the total number of applications accepted. And the last data for this are as of March 2016. USCIS had accepted 820,000 or so applications. 730,000 or almost 90% were approved. Well, we use that 820,000 accepted as the numerator for our rate. We look at two national application rates. So first, we look at among the 1.3 million immediately eligible youth who met all the criteria that we could model, including high school diploma and school enrollment. 63% of them had applied. But the broader group that includes those who don't meet the educational criteria that we can model, but who could actually be eligible because they're in an adult education program, that broader group of is 1.7 million, and the application rate is 48%. So we looked at these two sets of rates by state, and you can see some variation here, but I think it's also important to note, as we've shown before, really heavy concentration in certain states. So 30% of the eligible population in California, about 15% in Texas. If you add New York, Florida, and Illinois into that, you get about almost 60% in those 5 states. It's roughly the same ratio that are in those 5 states for the applications that are accepted too. But as I said, there's great variation in the share of the population that we've modeled to be eligible to have applied. It's highest in the top 10 states we showed here in Arizona at 86%, second highest in Texas at 76%. In general, the states out west and the southwest that and some of them in the southeast with the highest shares of Mexican origin population that are eligible tend to have the highest rates, because as we'll see in a moment, the Mexican population is the largest population with a high application rate, although in some of the Central American populations, application rates are relatively high. Now, when you get to the East Coast, Florida as well as the Northeast, and New York and New Jersey, if we were to show them here, they're smaller, but the New England states and the DC area, you tend to have lower application rates. And that's because Mexicans are a relatively low share of the total here. You have more populations from the Caribbean, Asia, other world regions that tend to have applied in lower numbers. So now if we look by country of origin, you can see, of course, the predominance of Mexico. It's 800,000 out of 1.3 million, so over 60% of the total eligible population. 630,000 out of 820,000 applicants, so 3/4 of the applicants, and a very high application rate among the immediately eligible of 77%, among the broader group, including the folks without the education that we can model, of 56%. And you see similarly high application rates among most of the other Central American countries, and Peru is high as well. But application rates are very low for the Asian countries, South Korea, China, India, and Philippines. In fact, China, USCIS has not released any data on the number of Chinese applicants. We're assuming there have been some, but the number is too small for them to report. So when we can question and answer, if you've got questions about why we believe the application rates to be low, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, at least, as to why this may be the case for these Asian countries. Now, if we look at renewal rates, our calculations here are based entirely on USCIS administrative data. We look at how many DACA applications had been approved about 2 years ago, as of June 2014, and then how many of them came up for renewal as of this March. They come up for renewal basically 2 years minus 120 days, because USCIS recommends people apply at least 120 days before their 2-year periods expire. So as of the end of June of 2014, 580,000 applications had been approved. And as of March 2016, 540,000 people had filed for approval. So there's a gap of about 40,000 there that hadn't filed yet, and our renewal request rate we estimate at 93%, which of course is very high. We looked at renewal rates by state, and they're high across the board. They're over 90% everywhere among the top 10 states except New York, which is 89%. And you can see here with the two bars that both the initial and renewal application rates are very high in California and Texas, far above the other states. We looked at renewal rates by country of birth and also didn't find much variation there. Again, Mexico predominates in sheer numbers. The renewal rates are very high in the mid-90s for Mexico and all the Central American countries. They're a little lower, just under 80% for those, under 90%, sorry, for some countries in some other world regions, but not substantially different. So those are the main data points that we report today, and with that, I will turn it over to Faye to talk about the policy context.
Great. Thanks, Randy. If I could remind folks that please send in your questions. Thanks for those of you who have already passed them along. And now we'll be moving to another of the report co-authors, Faye Hitzman, who's a policy analyst and California program coordinator for MPI's U.S. immigration program, and she'll be speaking about recent developments in DACA policy and what we know about DACA's impacts on recipients. So Faye, over to you.
Thanks, Margie, and thanks, Randy, for your presentation on the data. I'm first going to go over 4 recent DACA policy developments. The first of those is second-time DACA renewals. With DACA now at its 4-year mark, the early set of beneficiaries who applied in 2012 and then later renewed in 2014 are now eligible to renew their DACA grants for a second time. And we estimate that this group in that early cohort is about 500,000 people. And shortly we expect USCIS to issue a new DACA form that accommodates these second-time renewals. The second development is uncertainty surrounding DACA after the Obama administration. As we know, DACA was announced by executive action and has not been codified by Congress into law. And therefore, the program is completely under executive branch discretion. So in January 2014, President Obama will leave office and there will be a new president. And Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton has pledged to continue the DACA program while Republican nominee Donald Trump has promised to rescind it if he's elected. So this shows us that the program is in a fairly precarious position, and its continuation will likely depend on who wins the election in November. The third development is the lawsuit surrounding implementation of DACA and the DACA expansion. In November 2014, President Obama announced a series of executive actions on education, and the centerpiece of those was the deferred action for parents of Americans and lawful permanent residents. And MPI estimates that that program, it's a similar program to DACA, would have affected an estimated 3.7 million unauthorized immigrants. A second part of those actions would have expanded the DACA program by lifting the age cap off the program and adjusting the date of entry forward 3 years. And MPI estimates that those changes would have opened up DACA eligibility to another 290,000 individuals. Another component of the DACA expansion would be to expand or to increase the deferred action work authorization grants from 2 to 3 years. Shortly after those executive actions were announced, they were challenged by 26 states in federal court and enjoined by a U.S. District Court judge out of Texas in February 2015. This, throughout the years, the cases moved up through the courts, and in April was heard by the Supreme Court. And in June, the Supreme Court issued a 4-4 tie decision on the case, which left in place the lower court ruling and the injunction. It's important to note that the ruling does not affect the original DACA program, but that based on similar claims raised in the case U.S. v. Texas, opponents of deferred action have indicated that they might intend to file a fresh lawsuit against the DACA program, but it's unclear how that would play out in court. And the fourth development is a controversy surrounding 3-year work permits that were issued in 2014 and 2015. This district court injunction handed down in February 15 barred USCIS issuance of 3-year work permits and deferred action as proposed under the executive actions. However, before the injunction came down, USCIS issued 108,000 3-year work authorization documents or work permits, and mistakenly, after the injunction came down, the agency issued 2,600 3-year work permits. So this caused a major legal controversy in court, and USCIS was able to revoke almost all of the 2,600 3-year work permits that were issued by mistake and reissued 2-year permits to those recipients. More recently, the judge in the district court case, Judge Andrew Hannon, ordered DOJ, or the Obama administration, to provide a list of the 3-year permits that were issued before the injunction. So that's around 50,000 people because it only covers those who live in the plaintiff states in the case. Judge Hannon indicated that his intention was to keep the records or the list sealed, but under certain circumstances, he would be willing to release them to state officials. Now, obviously, if DOJ is ultimately required to provide this list, it poses a number of dangers to DACA grantees and their families. There are risks associated with being identified as unauthorized to state officials. So the next part of the presentation delves into some of DACA's impact on participants, and it's based on the results of several early small-scale surveys that look at issues such as employment and education. So first off, these surveys have found that DACA beneficiaries have experienced improved employment opportunities and earnings. For example, one of these surveys conducted by United We Dream in 2015 found that more than 75% of the survey respondents had obtained a new job after enrolling in DACA, and more than half reported obtaining a higher paying job. A similar survey conducted by the Institute for Research on Labor and Employment at UCLA found that 66% of recipients went from unemployed to employed after receiving DACA. And the National Undocumented Research Project found that 59% of survey respondents reported securing a new job since receiving DACA, and 45% had increased their earnings. And the same findings are true when these surveys compared DACA recipients to non-DACA counterparts. The IRLE survey found that 84% of DACA enrollees reported having a job versus 68% of those without deferred action under DACA. And DACA recipients also earned on average 20% more than their non-DACA counterparts. The surveys also addressed educational opportunities and social integration. So in terms of educational opportunities, the United We Dream survey found that 30% of DACA recipients stated they had returned to school, and many also found it easier to finance their education because DACA allows them to work. In the IRLE survey, 75% reported that they found it easier to attend school, and 70% said it was easier to stay in school. And I should also add that, this is from the previous slide, but DACA has also opened up access to professional licenses to some of its recipients. Since the program began, states have opened up their licensing systems to DACA beneficiaries. And in the last year, Nebraska has passed a measure opening up at least 170 professional licenses in fields such as healthcare and education, and New York has passed a similar measure. Another important impact on DACA participants is access to several ancillary benefits, such as driver's licenses, IDs, and advanced parole. Now, in most states, unauthorized immigrants are not eligible to receive driver's licenses, but DACA grantees, because they have deferred action under the Real ID Act, which is a federal law, and individual state policies, DACA recipients are eligible for driver's licenses or state IDs in all states. Now, this is an important thing to have because it allows people to drive to work and school legally without having to worry about getting stopped. And IDs are important for a range of functions, such as opening a bank account, accessing medical care, renting an apartment, and a lot more. Surveys show that a lot of DACA recipients, 90%, over 90% in all the surveys we looked at, show that DACA grantees have taken advantage of eligibility for driver's licenses and IDs. And the last impact I'll discuss is eligibility to apply for advanced parole. So DACA recipients are not automatically permitted to travel abroad, but they are eligible to apply for advanced parole, which is a travel document that allows a foreign national to travel outside the country and re-enter lawfully. With DACA grantees, USCIS looks at these applications on a case-by-case basis and only grants them for humanitarian, educational, or employment purposes. As of December 2015, around 22,000 DACA recipients had been granted advanced parole. And in some cases, DACA recipients who are eligible through a green card, through sponsorship by either a relative or employer, may be able to apply for adjustment of status or a green card if they leave the country and re-enter on advanced parole. And as of December 2015, around 3,000 DACA recipients have been granted both advanced parole and subsequently were approved for adjustment of status. Okay. To conclude, we have several key takeaways. The first is that with the broader DACA program and DACA expansion suspended by the courts, DACA really remains the only avenue for unauthorized immigrants to affirmatively receive deportation relief on a large scale. The second set of takeaways has to do with participation in DACA, and half, if not more, of the eligible population have applied for the program, and renewal rates exceed 90% almost across the board. There are also substantial benefits documented from these surveys and other sources. So we can take away from this that DACA is a large-scale program with significant reach and really valuable benefits for its participants. However, there are still gaps in coverage, and based on the estimates that we've come up with, outreach should really focus on two groups of unauthorized youth. The first group is those who would qualify by enrolling in an adult education program, and that's estimated to be around 398,000. And the other group is the group of youth that will age into eligibility when they turn 15, and that's about around 25,000, or 250,000 people, sorry. And with that, I will conclude and turn it back over to Margie.
Great, Faye, thanks so much. And thanks to all of you who have been keeping a stream of questions coming into us. Lots of very interesting places to go with the conversation based on what you've been writing in about. So, Randy, let me start with you with a few questions related to the June Supreme Court decision and some of its impacts. First of all, is there any evidence that the Supreme Court decision and possible confusion over its relationship or impact on the original DACA program have actually impacted people's willingness to apply for the program, for DACA?
Sure, Margie. I mean, I think it's too early to tell because the data that we've looked at are only through March. But the application numbers had already been pretty low on a monthly basis even before that. It's true that the Supreme Court ruling got a lot of attention, could cause more confusion, but it's not a new thing. I mean, we've had several adverse court decisions since February 2015, and that may already be factored into people's calculations about whether or not to apply.
Great. And then there was another question where there was an acknowledgement that it might be too early to model this, which you've just talked about, that we don't have the data yet from USCIS. But do you know in the data that USCIS is going to be providing, would there be a way to look at renewal and first-time application rates and you know, and how they've declined, or when might we be able to start looking at that. Strikes me that it wouldn't be for a long time given the big gap.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we didn't do it for this report. You can look at chunks of data. They release data quarterly. So you could look at what's the renewal rate for the first quarter of people that applied way back in fall 2012 versus what was their renewal rate in fall 2014, and then move every quarter forward to the latest one. We didn't do our analysis that way. The overall renewal rate's so high at over 90%, I don't think you'd see much of a trend one way or the other. But going forward, certainly when the next quarter of data become available, you could do that. Now, there is a hitch that we're worried about for purposes of our analysis and everybody else, and is that, you know, starting about now, they're going to start taking second renewals, and unless USCIS disaggregates first-time renewals from second-time renewals, it'll look like renewal rates even went up a little bit because you'll be combining first and second-time renewals. It's going to make the analysis difficult unless they disaggregate first and second-time renewals in their data, and that's something we and others have asked them to do, but we don't know they have the capability to do that or if they're going to do it, and if so, when.
Right, right, and all those renewal rates are very consequential in terms of folks, the potential consequences for people who don't renew. So, Faye, back to you. There's a question about renewal backlogs and whether, to what extent do we know that folks are being impacted by that? The writer is from New Mexico and states that they have dozens of clients who are losing their jobs and unable to go to school and the like because USCIS hasn't been approving applications, granting biometrics, or sending work authorization cards with within their stated timeline. So, anything you want to say about updates or folks who are really working those issues?
Sure. Well, first I'll say that those problems have been documented since the renewal process began. It's a little bit difficult to tell from the data what the backlog picture looks like because you see the number of pending cases, and fluctuations in the number of pending cases can either be a result of a slow pace of adjudications, or it can be the result of a slower pace of applications coming in. So it's very difficult to tell how many people the backlogs are affecting. But I would certainly say that these problems have existed, and the agency has definitely made statements that show that it intends to improve the problems.
Great. Randy, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I do, because one thing that we did report in the report we're releasing today is that there was a pretty large pending backlog last year, but it's down from 111,000 in March 2015 to 24,000 in March 2016. So it doesn't mean that the problem has disappeared, but it should be better now than it was a year ago. They should be, every sign is they're making progress. And of course that makes sense because the workload's been going down as application rate, you know, the numbers of applications coming in have been falling.
Great. And then, Randy, question about whether there's any DACA about DACA recipients having been detained, especially prior to their application being granted, and do we know of any who have been released upon approval of their DACA application or even been deported while their application is pending?
Yeah, we don't have any data on that. Those data would have to come from ICE, from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Of course, as is implied in the question, people who are eligible for DACA shouldn't be subject to detention and deportation. On the other hand, you know, there will be some people who are picked up or transferred out of state and local custody, and ICE is supposed to screen them for DACA eligibility, so they may be detained for a time or a period before that happens, but they shouldn't be deported. But we don't have any data verifying that.
Great, great. And then, Faye, there's a few questions about advanced parole. So could you just review how many DACA folks have applied for advanced parole and how it works in relationship to the green card process?
Sure. So as of December 2015, around 22,000 DACA recipients had been granted advanced parole, and I'm not sure what the application number is. And what advanced parole allows you to do is depart the country and re-enter lawfully. The reason why that's important for adjustment of status is because someone who entered without inspection or who doesn't have lawful status isn't eligible to adjust, to apply for and receive a green card from within the country. So they will have to depart to pick up a visa, and that can trigger a 3 and 10 year bar on being readmitted to the country. So what advanced parole does is allow you to re-enter the country and be paroled in, which counts as a lawful entry, and from there, some people may be able to apply for adjustment of status. And so as of December 2015, around 3,000 DACA recipients were granted advanced parole and subsequently approved for a green card from within the United States.
Great, and then a follow-on question is maybe a little more difficult to answer, but just why is the number so low? You know, like some folks are very upset that you know, that folks are being able to apply, you know, based on advanced parole for permanent legal status. But then this is sort of the flip side of that, of why is the number so low, and has it remained steady?
I'm not sure if it's remained steady. This is a total number of that covers all 4 years, or almost 4 years, and the number could be low for a number of reasons. It could be that not many DACA recipients are eligible for a green card through sponsorship by a relative. It could also mean, or an employer, it could also mean that this area of the law is still a little bit unclear, and it's very much done on a case-by-case basis. So it might be the case that a lot of DACA recipients don't want to risk leaving the country and potentially not being let in on advanced parole, and it could be a possibility. And I would say those are the reasons that the numbers are so low, and just that this area of the law isn't completely ironed out yet.
Great. Okay. Thanks. And so, Randy, a few questions about the numbers. So, one is, are the DACA applicants by country proportional to the number of people coming from that country? And then also, how low can we go on the data? For example, are there any estimates of the DACA applicant or DACA eligible population at the sub-county level, meaning the census tract level? And if not, is there a plan for producing those kinds of estimates?
Yeah, so I'll take that second question first. We generally have stuck to counties, and even within counties, only the major ones, just because we don't really have enough of a sample out of the American Community Survey to get to smaller levels of geography. So we don't have any plans to go any lower than the county estimates that we're releasing today. I'm sorry, and then Margie, the first question was about the
are the application rates proportional?
Oh, yeah.
You know, when you look at the country level.
So looking at the countries, I mean, there's a number, I think, a number of things to unpack in that question. So first of all, there's a lot of variation by country, so they're not proportionate in that there's far more applicants from Mexico and Central America than there are in the eligible populations that we've estimated, and the application rates are very low from Asian countries. So there's also, in terms of the eligible population versus the overall unauthorized population, it's not necessarily proportionate either. So there's tends to be a high share from Mexico and potentially eligible populations because they have to have been at least in the country since 2007. And the Mexican origin population, on average, been in the country longer than a lot of the other populations. The Asian populations and Central American populations in particular have been rising a lot recently, so they're more recent. They're more likely to not have been in the country long enough to qualify. But if you look at educational attainment, actually, the better educated populations tend to come from Asia and countries outside of the Mexican and Central American region. So if you're looking at it strictly in terms of who has the high school degree, and that side of the criteria, actually, you would see the people from countries like South Korea, China, India, Philippines overrepresented in what we call the immediately eligible population. But the broader population that includes those who are eligible except for education sort of accounts for that, because we don't use education as a factor in that analysis.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. And then Randy, there's I think a clarification you might agree with that someone has written in with when you spoke about the DACA, the renewal number. I think what you meant was that the number of pending renewals is much lower than a year ago, and in that context, it's better. But then that's different from the wait time that some folks might be experiencing, I think is the clarification that this writer is saying, that the wait time is in a sense worse, but I wonder if that's more about particular applications that are stuck as opposed to overall wait times for processing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily to imply even that the rate of pending is necessarily a lot better, but the sheer volume of it is lower. But that's partially a fact because there are just fewer renewal applications being filed now. We don't have data on wait time, so right. It's also possible that certain applications are taking a really long time and people are encountering those and, not encountering the ones that are going through more smoothly. But that's by no means to say that there aren't still problems with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then Faye, what do we, there's a question about how to think about the number of folks who appear to be or are non-renewers. And yet at the same time, we have data from folks like Tom Wong that speak to that there are a fair number of individuals who are DACA eligible, but who also turned out to be eligible for some other form of relief. So is there any way to sort of pin that down a little better, pin down what the relationship is there between the two?
I'm not sure I understand exactly what the two things are. Can you?
That we know that some of the DACA recipients, or it appears from Tom Wong's work that some of those who didn't renew are likely those who are eligible for some other form of relief. So is there a way to crosswalk those two ideas? I think there isn't. I don't think that there's
Yeah, I think there's not. I think that I have not seen, I don't believe there's data on how, basically the journey through the system that DACA recipients have taken that's aggregated into why they didn't renew. So I don't think we can tell that. The one thing I would say about the surveys that we mentioned indicate that really that very high percentage of DACA recipients renew, and those surveys are a little bit may overstate that percentage a little bit. So that's all I'd add.
Got it. Randy, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the issue of applying for being eligible for other forms of relief that are, probably carry broader, better benefits than DACA applies to initial as well as renewal applications and might be a reason why it's lower, and our application rates estimated are lower in other populations. you know, the populations that are visa overstayers that didn't cross the southwest border illegally are more likely to be in a position to apply for these things. They're less likely to have to leave the country. They're not necessarily subject to those 3- and 10-year bars on admission, legal admission. So there are more options open to some populations than others, and we haven't produced any data on that, but others have in their surveys suggested, and Tom Wong is one of them, that a substantial percentage of people that are screened by legal service providers are found to be eligible for one of these other forms of relief. And so if we're saying that somewhere between half and 2/3 of the population that was eligible got DACA, maybe another 10% got something else. And that we don't factor that in to our calculations. That would make the picture look a little bit better than what we paint in the report.
Flip side of that, there's a question about what do we know about the 11% of folks who don't get approved. Do we have any idea what the reasons are that folks don't get approved, Faye?
That could be for a range of reasons. It could be that people don't pass a background check, that they have criminal convictions or records that disqualify them from DACA, that, for example, USCIS issued a request for more evidence on the case and the applicant didn't get back to them, or that people file without meeting the criteria unknowingly. So that can, the rejections, it's a small fraction of the applications, but that can happen for a variety of reasons.
And we don't have any data on, the USCIS has not published reason for denial, but we have heard, or I have heard anecdotally from lawyers, that sometimes the continuous residence for 5 years has been difficult to prove. It depends on what kind of standard of evidence USCIS requires for that, and also proving evidence in a particular time point that somebody was here at, in June 2012. Those two things, I think, have caught some people, but we can't quantify that those are the most important reasons for denials.
Great. Okay, and then we have a whole cluster of questions that have to do with how to improve rates of uptake for the program and strategies and that sort of stuff, some of which crosses over into a forthcoming report that the MPI Center on Immigrant Integration Policy is going to be putting out in the fall based on field work, looking at on-the-ground strategies and programs that folks are using to help reach different DACA subpopulations and the like. But Randy, one that really goes directly to the data that you were presenting, issues about the really different rates of application for different subgroups by nationality. Could you say a little bit about that, about what do we know about what might be some of the reasons for that?
Yeah, I mean, as we showed, the application rates, there's room for improvement, but they're pretty high among Mexican population and most of the Central American populations, but generally low for other world regions. And, sort of as I mentioned, I think that those folks who didn't enter without inspection are much more likely to be open to eligible for other forms of relief and even potentially applications for green cards. And that we've heard anecdotally, for instance, this is a young population getting married to a citizen or a green card holder is something that is possible for a large number, and actually quite likely, if you think about a population that, if you look at the Mexican and Central American population, the other thing is you just have very large unauthorized populations within them, and so the likelihood of meeting someone that you can marry that has a green card or a citizenship is a little lower than in populations like, say, Chinese and Indian immigrants, where the vast majority are LPRs or have citizenship. Then there's also the factor, too, of how much exposure people have to marriage partners who are not in their same, national origin group. And the smaller the origin country is, the greater that exposure is. So that would put people from Mexico and from maybe China and India at a disadvantage. But all that's just to say what we've heard anecdotally, that don't have hard numbers on, is that people are waiting for avenues to green cards, with marriage being a major one of them. And I wouldn't expect that pattern to change that much. So we've seen persistently low application rates among most origins that are not Mexico or Central America, and heard frustrations many times from people in the field are our eligible numbers too high, which they may be. Maybe we're getting the characteristics wrong, or how could we reach people? Why are the application numbers so low? But we, over the last 4 years, haven't seen any real change in that pattern.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So Faye, if we were to be thinking of as one of the folks who's with us on the webinar wrote in, how do we get the what would it take to get the application number up to 1 million? The question is what particular subpopulations would be best to focus on, and what are some of the strategies for reaching them? So I know you touched on that a bit towards the end of your presentation. Do you want to recap that?
Sure. I can recap that quickly. So based on who has applied for DACA and what gaps still exist, we think that outreach should really focus on 2 groups of unauthorized youth. The first is the around 400,000 who could qualify for DACA, who meet all the other requirements but for education, and could qualify for DACA by enrolling in adult education. And the second population is the population of younger, potentially eligible beneficiaries who will age into the DACA program when they turn 15, will then be able to apply, and that's around 228,000. So those are really the 2 populations that should be targeted. And Margie, I'm not sure if you want to add on to that a little bit.
Yeah, I guess I would just say that that we have been trying to track what the efforts are out in the field. We published a year ago, January, looking at efforts that were underway in 7 states with different subpopulations, different contexts of reception and the like, trying to get a taste of what were some of the more effective outreach strategies and assistance efforts and the like. And I would say that that in terms of folks who are in their 20s and or early 30s and don't have a high school diploma or equivalent, that certainly one of the bigger barriers seems to be just a lack of identification with the program. You know, that they see the program as being for people who succeeded in high school, were valedictorians, were on their way with scholarships to college, and really much more the vision that many folks in the country have of these empowered young people who are college bound and sort of the classic profile of dreamers, whereas these folks didn't experience as much success in school and seem not to be as connected on social media, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's just a lack of identification with the program in a sense that it really could be for them. And so what we've been hearing in our current field research is that those sorts of people are being picked up more via clinics that kind of say, hey, come on in and see what you might be eligible for. Let's just take a look, at your immigration issues, and that a number of folks who are DACA eligible, or I should say a small steady stream of folks are turning up as part of that. Obviously, fear is an issue, and Randy, you might want to say a little bit more about that, because there have been a number of questions here about how, what do we know about how politics, not just the Supreme Court decision, but the political climate more generally might be affecting things. But certainly all legal service providers across the country continue to report that many folks are coming forward who've known they were eligible for a while, but that they were putting together the funding. Very often they had several family members who might be eligible for the program. They've been steadily saving in order to afford the fees and the like. So the ability to put together funding has also been an issue. And then, I would say that for the high school population, we have a hunch that a lot of the folks who are part of the small, steady stream of folks who are applying are those who are aging into the program. It's been a little bit surprising to see that there aren't more partnerships with school districts and elementary schools, high schools, training of high school counselors on issues related to the DACA program, because it does seem that, you know, that there are some, there's institutional infrastructure there that could possibly be better leveraged for getting the word out to that important population of younger kids who are aging into the program when they turn 15. Anyway, Randy, you want to say something about what current politics?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fear in politics question is an interesting one, and we always get it, and it could cut both ways. You think on the one hand, people could be too fearful to apply and what might happen with their information, and on the other hand, it might provide incentives. And I actually think that the political climate, the evidence that we do have based on the statistics suggests that, you know, the groups that are most likely to apply are from Mexico and Central America. The groups that are most likely to renew are from Mexico and Central America. That's the vast majority, you know, 85–90% of people who are detained and deported have their origins in Mexico and Central America. It's not to say that groups with other origins wouldn't be fearful and aren't subject to that, but not to the same extent. And we've also generally seen the highest application rates in states like Arizona, Texas, and North Carolina, where there's been a lot of enforcement. So I think just based on the evidence that we do have from our data and estimates that, you know, the fear and political situation is more likely to drive more people to apply and more people to renew. And I would anticipate that to continue to be the case. Great.
And then Randy or Faye, I'm not sure which of you might want to take on this one, but is there, are there any data about how people are applying on their own versus with the assistance of an organization or legal services or attorneys? Is that being published as part of the USCIS reports? You know, how are people trying to track that down? Randy, you want to take a whack at that?
I mean, you know, there aren't published data on that. If USCIS could tell us how many people filed and had an attorney, you know, had the G28 or whatever the form number is that goes with that, you could know how many were represented. That might be the one way that you could get an angle on that from USCIS data. I mean, the surveys that have been done of how people apply are generally, you know, done through community organizations or networks, and probably less likely to pick up people that have applied on their own. So I'm not sure that those data would be as accurate representation of the entire population. You'd really kind of have to do some sort of a truly representative survey of the whole population that's applied, and I think that's difficult to do.
Mm-hmm. Faye, any thoughts on that?
Well, I would add also that I agree with Randy's comment that a lot of these applications have likely come through different clinics, but this population of DACA grantees is also very tech-savvy and connected to the internet, and that may up the chances that they will apply themselves by sharing information with each other and looking up how to go through the process online and by themselves. And my understanding is that compared to many USCIS forms and applications, the DACA application is one of the more streamlined ones.
Great. All right, well, so getting ready to wrap up here, I just want to point out, there are a few questions that we haven't gotten to, and we'll get to those of you who sent them in via email. But for now, a few of them had to do with questions related to, I would say, a bit more some of the field work or what's happening at the local level. So for those of you who are interested in issues like the effect on college-going rates, then what do we know about DACA and folks who are eligible for the program in college-going? We did have an earlier webinar on that that you'll be able to find at the events portion of our website. A lot of the closer look at those sorts of impacts will be in the report that we're releasing in the fall. And strategies for reaching folks who are in the eligible but for education group It was a topic in a prior report a year ago, January, also in a webinar related to that. You can find that on our website, and a lot of that will be refreshed with new information from about another year's worth or so of looking at what's been happening in the field with the report coming out in the fall. In the meantime, lots of resources up on the website. Please take a look at the new data tool. You'll see that that everything's been updated as of today with the new runs of data and information that are part of today's report. And I think it's fair to say that you can track down Randy and Faye if you have questions about what you see up there with the new data tool. And I trust you'll find this all very easily accessible on the website. So here's our contact information, and many, many thanks to all of you for joining us. Have a great rest of the day.